Thomas Corbett Dillon went on GB News and claims there is a white genocide.
Such as GB News, I'm sure. And, I think it's so funny that they seem to think that GB News is this extremist channel. I'm like, I'd love for them to turn on Fox News once in a while and see what actually, so you want to hear some extremist views, you're not getting them on GB News. GB News is actually really, really impartial and really good about this. But yeah, it's why are these people coming? Why do we have to listen to them? And they're the ones that say, social cohesion, it's going to be probably attacking the right wing in the country. It's similar to what happened in Germany, where they've basically banned all the right wing parties and you can't support them. I'm sure they'll be going after the Restore Party. I'm sure Reform will get some attacks too. So, yeah, I think you're right. And it is interesting in America, as you say, they don't really have as many isolated communities. In Birmingham in England, you've got the Muslims that basically just live in there. They all speak the same language. They live in their own little world. You don't really get that in America. When people move to this country, they tend to integrate pretty well. You kind of embrace America. There's not been much embracing of British values among these communities. And I hate this idea that England is just like a no man's land. It's like, no, there is an indigenous population that have lived on that island for thousands of years. And, if this was happening in any other place around the world, everyone would be defending and saying, wow, there's a genocide happening in this island because it is being taken over by different people that are not indigenous to that land. And I think that's a sad thing to happen. So I think...
genocide, is that a bit of a harsh word? White Brits are still the majority in the UK.
Yeah, currently, give it 10 years, give it 20 years. Yes, if this was happening, if there was an island of indigenous people in, the Pacific, and all of a sudden a bunch of white people moved there and were having babies and the number one name in that country became Tom, all of a sudden the UN would be there and saying, this is outrageous, that's an indigenous island, those people have rights. But do it to England and no one seems to care. I think that's a real shame.
Well, there was some reports, I can't remember where from the top of my head, but there was a report saying that I think white Brits would be a minority in the next 50 years or so.
We're just being gaslighted. Are you insane? There's so much to unpack there. Corbett Dillon saying, first of all, GB News isn't an extreme channel, then goes on to say that white people are facing a genocide with very little pushback. The new pushback he got from the host, Ben, I can't remember his last name actually, he says, well, is the word genocide a bit harsh? It's absolutely insane. Now, by the way, when he talks about how, well, what if, we as white people went to other countries and started taking over, we'd be outraged. That's been happening for hundreds of years, potentially thousands of years, right? What about the British Empire? What about colonialism? Did you just forget about all of that? This is insane. And of course, saying that GB News is impartial. Christ, I nearly fell off my seat hearing that. Look, we are biased. We are not impartial. We are literally called Turn Left. We are a media of socialists. But we admit that. We say, yeah, we are on the left. But also, we don't lie about our stuff. You've got a guy saying GB News is impartial. That's crazy. You guys have seen me try and debate Nana Aquia. If you don't let you get in a word edgeways. Just absolutely insane. Now, Corbett Dillon is peddling the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which is the idea that people are orchestrating a takeover of white people and replacing them with brown and black people. Now, this is an old and extremely anti-Semitic argument in which Jewish people were the ones behind the replacement. Great Replacement, also known as white replacement theory or white genocide theory, claims there is an intentional effort led by Jews to promote mass non-white immigration, interracial marriage, and other efforts that would lead to the extinction of whites. This conspiracy theory was famously promoted at the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville when white supremacists chanted, "Jews will not replace us," while a similar conspiracy theory was prevalent in Nazi Germany and has been promoted by white nationalists for decades. So this is literally a Nazi talking point that's being promoted on GB News. Now look, I agree there is a lack of debate in this country. You put on BBC, ITV, whatever it is, and the confines of the debate is between the opposition leader and the Prime Minister. If the opposition leader and the Prime Minister agree on war, then the debate is how much war do we do? If the opposition leader and the Prime Minister agree on austerity, the debate is how much austerity shall we do? Absolutely, the debate is so narrow. So I agree with debate and stuff, right? And of course, this country has huge issues with censorship. Namely, arresting people for holding signs. But we have to draw the line somewhere. And for me, right, it's Nazi conspiracy theories. Wow, what a radical I am. Now, whilst this is being discussed, GB News contributors continue to ignore the real genocide in Palestine. Now, look, I have no issue with people debating and discussing immigration. And yes, ethnic demographic changes are happening. There are less white people as a percentage in this country than there were 50 years ago, albeit white people are still a massive majority. But to claim there is a genocide, all right, this is truly dangerous, where GB News are again mainstreaming Nazi talking points. And by the way, who cares? What does someone's skin color matter, right? And the thing is, though, we have gone from talking about being concerned about illegal immigration to whites are being replaced at breakneck speed. Okay, this isn't a 20, 30 year project. This has been 2, 3, 4 years. I mean, 5 years ago, you wouldn't have heard Keir Starmer say, we're a nation of strangers or an island of strangers. You couldn't think of it. It'd be unfathomable. I mean, the talking points and policies of the BNP, which you couldn't say 5, 10 years ago, are being adopted by the Labour Party. And now we've got people going on GB News on TV saying that white people are facing genocide. Also, Corbett Dillon, and it says on GB News he was a former advisor to Boris Johnson. He claims he's a former advisor to Boris Johnson. In reality, he worked for Westminster Digital, who provided videos of Johnson's leadership campaign. So he didn't actually work for him. A really weird thing to lie about. Noah, those who are and were obsessed about illegal immigration, in my view, weren't really talking about illegal immigration. This is the actual discussion they wanted to have. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do, and I think the big admission that needs to be offered by Keir Starmer when he talks about a nation of strangers and Corbett Dillon here is that fundamentally liberal democracy was never set up for people that weren't white. And if we look at some of like the philosophical scholarship of people like Charles Mills, when he looks at the racial contract, we see the ability to unpack a lot of this liberal ideology around the preservation of private rights, but that doesn't apply to people if they are not of your same creed and culture. If people want to host themselves in communion with other people that follow the same creed, let's say in a mosque, that's entirely consistent and coherent with liberal politics. But for people who are sort of see the connotations of liberal democracy as being purely for white people, that suddenly becomes an affront to their society as they see it. I was thinking, you rightly alluded to it, it's really important we unpack what's going on here with the linguistics. I think, and maybe there's a bit conspiratorial of me, there's a concerted effort among, let's say, the centrist media and right-wing politics to undermine certain things in the Overton window, let's say, such as a genocide. To refer to this as a genocide, to just refer to sort of a medium level of immigration to one of the most multicultural societies or countries in the world that has benefited a lot from globalization as a genocide, is to undermine, like you said, the real genocide going on in Palestine, the real war crimes going on in Sudan, the real genocide going on in Sudan, the real systematic genocide that's coming as a downstream of that same globalization in the Congo. And, like I say, maybe it's conspiratorial of me to say that there's a concerted effort to undermine this, but there's exactly what is coming from that.
And I saw, of course, the host was talking about how, okay, maybe genocide's a bit too strong, but, white people will become a minority by 2066. I mean, that was the figure that was also pushed by far-right political parties and accounts, right? And it may be true that, yes, like, white people won't be the majority. They're going to be the plurality, right? But what I find incredibly ironic and funny is that the right wing have adopted sort of the inverse of liberal identity politics, insofar that the right wing used to say, we care about you as a person, your personality matters, your skin color doesn't matter. And the problem with the left is they're so obsessed with identity that I must speak over you because I'm a person of color, for example, and me being a person of color or religion, that's part of my identity. And the right wing really reject that. And to be honest, like, that was quite appealing to a lot of people who weren't into critical race theory or understood the nuances when it came to race, religion in terms of society, right? Your average person who doesn't really care about politics, that made sense. They'd be like, I don't care what kind of skin you are, the person matters. That is what the right wing used to say. And now they've done this inverse liberal identity politics, which is actually race and religion and culture. That's the only thing that matters. And they're now talking about it now. They're saying, oh my God, white people are going to be a minority. But where were you? Hold on a second. You were disagreeing with yourself 5 years ago and you said you didn't care about skin color. What do you think's happening here? Do you think that, once again, those that pretended to say, oh, it doesn't matter what color skin you are as the person, right? That was also a cover for this kind of politics. And they just waited to see that it was going to become more They were allowed to say it. It became easier for them to say it's the mainstream.
Yeah. I think it's become more intellectualized is the way I describe it. Is, there's racism quite flagrantly, and racism at its root is an emotional response to someone you've othered. And what I'd say is, many people understand maybe in the chat today is that it's very much an arbitrary thing. So, for example, one of the things that Corbett Dillon said there was that there's an indigenous population for thousands of years. But in fact, there was a great documentary back in the day called Who Owns Britain? And the highest correlation chance of you being a significant landowner in the British Isles is whether your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, 27 times removed, was a friend of William the Conqueror. So, these are arbitrary delineators we make between one group and another, depending on an emotional response. At one point, it was Normans coming over here. Another point, it was Huguenots. Another point, it was Jewish people fleeing pogroms. And depending whatever visceral reaction you have to them, you might display that in terms of explicit racism. But as it sort of becomes more normalized, it becomes an intellectualized approach to othering. And that's what we're seeing here. Is it's become part of common parlance. There's been a framework set out by a lot of scholarship. Matt Goodwin was part of that scholarship to sort of express that emotion.
Interesting with Matt Goodwin, because he did that shit. He was sort of like a centrist, centre-right figure doing research on the far right and fascists, and he became one. But it's really interesting. I mean, do you think then that the party Restore, are they having an impact? I mean, we're seeing these kind of discussions now. We had a member from Restore go on Talk TV with Alex Phillips saying, basically, you're not British if you're not a Christian, which the irony there is if you trace back Christianity, it's from the Middle East, not in the West or Eurocentric. So it's like, where do you draw the line there? But yeah, there's a fundamental conversation happening about race and culture. Do you think, whilst I don't think Restore electorally can have any success, do you think this as a party is pushing this conversation, or do you think it's something more wider than this particular party by Rupert Lowe?
I think that maybe it's becoming quite normalized now that your politics no longer needs to appeal to a principle or to an ideal, but more become an expression of a feeling. And so when we see that kind of argument from Restore that if you're not white, you're not British, they're actually not. The veil has dropped, and they're not appealing to some sort of theoretical framework that we might have seen with New Labour or even the Thatcher years. We're appealing to an economic framework of Hayek that we need to pursue these sorts of policies. No. Disregard any frameworks. We're going to build from the ground up based on my instinctual feeling that I have for society and how I want society to be, and we're going to build from there. And in some ways, that can be quite constructive and sort of radical. But in this instance, when driven by that revolting racism and xenophobia, it is very dangerous. If that becomes like a normalized way of interacting with politics, and we're not appealing to ideals, we're not appealing to principles, we're just espousing our emotions, we're just espousing our sort of our most base feelings.
Yeah, and the irony that has been levelled at the left is that they're the snowflakes, we're the overly emotional ones, but actually I call them the woke right. Some people hate it when I say that, but I want to sort of emphasize that it's the right wing who are the ones who are so emotional, and they're the ones that are obsessed about identity, yet they've got nothing to say on class.
I think also maybe just as a tool for everyone is like my thing that I've been banging on about for years now when we have these arguments about who is British and who isn't. If someone really wants to get take a stand and start saying who isn't British, I just want just a brief outline of what is Britishness then.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then you by all means go ahead and state your case. But until we get a proper outline from GB News, Restore Britain, Reform UK, and these sorts of institutions of what Britishness is, then I don't want to hear this sort of haphazard, offhand dismissal of someone's identity.
But you know what? Actually, it's not just the right wing at fault; it's the Liberals. I can't remember the Labour MP's name. He pinned an article about what it is to be British, or Matt Goodwin isn't really British, and you do hear from Liberals, Labour MPs, whatever, centrists who say, this person isn't, this far-right activist isn't really British because they don't care about democracy. You hear it a lot when it comes to America. They say, what Donald Trump is doing is so un-American, which I don't think that's really a basis in reality. I mean, there's lots of things he's doing which is American, which is appalling, but very American. And the problem is, when you've got both sides doing it, that's a very dangerous thing. When you're saying, the right wing says, you've got to be a Christian, you've got to believe in these fundamental values, and essentially a lot of people think you've got to be white to be British. And then you've got liberals saying, well, if you don't believe in rule of law or democracy, you're not really British. I'm sorry to say, in my opinion, it is as simple as just having a bit of paper. You're a British citizen. And I'd rather have that conversation there than open up, even in a well-meaning way, when liberals say, look, you should care about people and things and institutions. That's what Britain really is. Well-meaning maybe, but also I think it's incredibly dangerous because you're opening up that Pandora's box in which you were once considered British for believing this particular thing, and 10 years later you may believe the same thing, but you're now no longer British.
Yeah, I think, and it was Jeevan Sander who wrote that article saying that Matt Goodwin I'm more British than Matt Goodwin or something along those lines. And no, I agree with you that I think those archaic, somewhat Weberian or Westphalian ideas of statehood, that you're either state by blood or state by birth, are starting to fray at the seams, especially in the wake of globalization. That's really been sort of the final domino to fall in pushing that Westphalian idea of a state to its boundaries. When it comes to this idea of Britishness, I agree with you in the sense that it isn't particularly good to use it as a political football, but I would encourage people at home to look into the implications of the Shamima Begum case. Shamima Begum was the Bethnal Green schoolgirl who ran away to fight for ISIS in Syria, or to support the ISIS mission in Syria. And she was made stateless by the Home Secretary at the time. And the implications of that is that prior to this case, you would not be made stateless if you didn't have another passport. Shamima Begum didn't have another passport, but it was presumed that she would be able to reasonably apply for statehood in, I believe it was Bangladesh. And that presumption that there was a reasonable chance she could obtain statehood elsewhere became a new precedent to make someone stateless. And what this does is it sets up a second-class citizenship for anyone, such as perhaps Curtis or myself, who could apply for statehood elsewhere, even if they haven't. It also sets up a whole second class of citizenship for every Jewish person in the UK, because they could obtain statehood in Israel. So I think that is quite a pivotal moment in this development of what it means to be Britishness, and has fundamentally create a legal framework for this rhetoric we're seeing today, where people are saying, your Britishness can be called into question at any given moment based on these arbitrary determiners that I feel today.
That's a really good point, because I remember a lot of us, when we were talking about Shamima Begum, and obviously a lot of people in the right wing trying to say, oh, you're a terrorist lover. First of all, she was, our argument, and I believe it's so, she was groomed by terrorists, but also it's not about how you felt about this particular person. Morals aside, the logistics here is really important to make sure that we don't set this precedent. So much so that even Jacob Rees-Mogg was against it, because he was like, we shouldn't set up this precedent. And now we set that precedent. You're absolutely right. Anything's game now, which is really dangerous. I've never been to India. I'm half Indian. Never been. Yeah, what's stopping the state turn around and say, well, you could probably get a passport because of your family, so therefore we can make you stateless. And the reason why, because I went to a pro-Palestine rally, for example. It's extremely dangerous. And it's not just the far right and right wing doing it. It's the liberals and the centrists, I think, are facilitating it.